Thank you, Patrick. Hopefully we'll have a very interesting and stimulating afternoon. I have the honour of chairing the first session, and in that we have 3 speakers. The first is John Fitzgerald, followed by Karl, Whelan and then by Nolan, who are all here beside me on the podium. And what I propose to do is to ask the first presenter, John Fitzgerald, in a moment to carry on with his presentation. And perhaps after his presentation, we will have questions and answers. And just to allow people to have plenty of time for questions, what I would suggest is perhaps that we take all the questions from the floor and then ask John to answer those. And if we follow that, it means that we have roughly 20 minutes per presentation, and it would leave another 20 minutes or thereabouts for questions, which I think hopefully will allow lots of interaction. And if we follow that then through with the second and third speakers, hopefully we'll be finished by 3:30. So, with any further ado, I'd like to ask John to make the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Colm is going to keep on holding these conferences, and when you stop coming, we'll know the recovery has started. Thank you. We showed this slide of Icarus falling when we opened our press conference in 2003 to launch our medium-term review. I think we know that Icarus has flown too close to the sun, and the question is he going to crash into the sea, or can he be patched up? And I think that this is really the topic of this conference. I'm going to talk about competitiveness. By competitiveness, I mean what is the price level in Ireland which will see us restored to full employment. I'm not going to show you graphs of how things have moved over time relative to other countries, because that doesn't tell you where we've got to go to. Where we've got to go to is reprice this economy so that when the world recovers, we will return to full employment. And I will say something on recent history on crowding out, because that explains what part of the task that has to be done, that it is greater than it would have been quite some time ago, in, say, 2000. And I want to talk about the behaviour of the labour market, because I think that's the key to how we will get out of this mess. And then, in return to full employment, some of the issues in terms of the composition of the unemployment. And finally, say something briefly on potential output, how the impact of the labour market will impact on potential output. First of all, in terms of the economy, in 2000, Olivier Blanchard, who is now the chief economist of the IMF, wrote a very interesting paper in Ireland and Spain. I suppose it was informed by the fact that he had a very bright young Irish PhD student who was speaking immediately after me. Less bright, less young, maybe as bright. But in that paper, he contrasted Ireland and Spain. And in the Irish case, we were running a balance payment surplus. In Spain's case, clearly there were signs of overheating. And his interpretation was that Ireland needed a real appreciation of the exchange rate. Price level in Ireland had to rise because we were too competitive. The problem about doing that by changing wage rates is that it's very difficult to control. We discovered just how difficult it was to control. However, subsequent to him writing that paper, we had a build-up in the housing market, of the housing market bubble, which we all know, and it has now burst. And the problem about that was it crowded out the rest of the economy. A lot of the economics literature wrote about how the public sector crowded out the private sector. But in this case, the housing and building construction sector crowded out the tradable sector of the economy. In order to grab the resources to produce a truly amazing level of output by world standards, it had to raise prices and wage rates for the whole economy, which meant that firms in the tradable sector were priced out of the market. We squeezed the economy. And then, of course, the bubble burst. And the problem is that we have to price ourselves back into the market, not just existing firms, but we will need new firms, new businesses to take up the slack, to take up those people who've lost their jobs permanently in the building construction sector and related areas. And I just show here housing in Ireland and in Spain. Housing in Ireland, 14.5% of the economy. The normal in the developed world is around 5%. So we're going back down to 4% or less. So that's 10 percentage points of the economy, which we had to squeeze the rest of the economy in order to make it available. Now, it won't bounce back just as easily. It's not like a bouncing castle where you go down and up and down and up, and you go up less than you go down. And it doesn't actually come out that well here, but I show the building in the public sector, the employment there as a share of the labour force, it expanded significantly, squeezing the dark blue. And the problem is, we've got the dark blue and the green, which is the unemployed. We have to do something to expand the tradable sector to provide full employment in the recovery. Right. How does the labour market work? In Ireland, it's a fairly flexible labour market, and in the long run, it clears in a sense. Wage rates in Ireland are determined by the elasticity of labour demand and the elasticity of labour supply. And what makes Ireland different is the shape of the supply curve in Ireland. Female labour supply is responsive to wage rates, more so than male participation, but it is migration that makes us different. And I show here the traditional model migration. I think Brendan Walsh in 1967 first published. Lots of other people published similar models, Patrick Honohan in 1992. And they worked through that period, where net migration in Ireland was a function of relative wage rates in Ireland relative to the United Kingdom, or the unemployment in Ireland relative to the United Kingdom. And I just characterise it in terms of relative wage rates. You can also do it in terms of the unemployment. But for migration to be zero, in equilibrium, you can derive that the wage rate in Ireland has got to be equal to the wage rate in the United Kingdom, plus or minus a margin, basically lower than the United Kingdom. That what that meant was there was an infinitely elastic supply of labour in Ireland. Irish people would keep on coming back from Britain if they could get a job which paid 5% less than they could get in Britain. Or else if the unemployment rate in Ireland was 4 percentage points higher than in Britain. And so that was the model which worked in the past. And what it meant was, and I show here the labour supply curve, which is infinitely elastic, snapped at the Irish wage rate relative to the UK or the foreign wage rate. If you imposed a tax under those circumstances, all of the incidence of the tax was in the employer, and it had an effect on employment. And that was one of the implications of this. So that the partnership process reflected this in the late 1980s, the trade-off of taxes for wage rates, that it made sense at the time. However, that supply curve is now no longer flat, it actually rises. Wages are set in the market, and one of the things is that the government can't control competitiveness directly, or the price of labour directly, but it can influence it through a range of different policies which I come back to. But previously wage rates were set broad, as I said, and you had this infinitely elastic supply of labour. However, from the 1990s onwards, things began to change. We ran out of Irish people. Abroad, the stock was falling. And also the change that foreigners came to work in Ireland, and they actually needed more relative to whatever labour market they were coming from to come to Ireland. And it has made the supply of labour much less elastic. And in addition, in a paper by David Duffy, myself, and Edith Carney, we showed that the cost of housing further made that curve less elastic. Now, I show here a number of different papers where we've estimated, either in reduced form or in the terms of structural model, elasticity of supply and demand. And you see that for the latest period, we estimate in the overall macro model comes out with an elasticity of labour supply of plus 0.6, which is way down on what it was estimated to be earlier. Right. First of all, what this means is that crowding out matters now. It did not in the 1980s. If you could get an infinite quantity of Irish building workers to come back from Britain for the same wage rate, if you could offer them a job in Ireland, that wasn't the case by the early years of this decade. So wage rates had to rise to attract the building workers from Germany, from Britain, and ultimately from the new member states. So you get crowding out, which you didn't get before. Also, in terms of tax incidence, more of the tax incidence falls on employees. So that compared to the 1980s, the recent increase in taxes, more of it will fall on employees than it did in the past, although tax on labour are still bad news. And it means that Phillips curve, that the Irish economy, whereas before unemployment did not affect the wage rate directly in Ireland, now it does. So that people are reacting to the disaster which we're facing in the labour market by changing their behaviour. In terms of their bargaining for wage rates, we are seeing in the public sector acceptance of a 7.5% pay cut, and in the private sector, sort of in a whole range of areas, in particular the media is very transparent, other areas where it appears